Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live, our live and uncut podcast with no adverts, interviewing some of the movers and shakers from all around the world. And tonight I've got Janelle Barlow. Janelle's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is pretty south in the USA, on the border of Mexico. I think I might have got that wrong, but we'll find out. Janelle's a professional speaker and author. Has a PhD, and particularly is interested in complaining and why people don't complain and how much money you leave on the table if you don't complain. So welcome, Janelle. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on Monday Night Live, and perhaps you'd share your story. A couple of minutes about Janelle Barlow would be fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've been interested in a number of topics, but I've decided to completely change my whole model, and I'm going online, virtual. And so I've narrowed all my subject areas down to complaint handling. I have a book out called A Complaint is a Gift, which sort of, it began to really make the field quite popular. That book came out in the late 1980s, and it's in its third edition right now. And the book that I'm working on now is that book was really for people who talked with customers. The book I'm working on now is called Listen to, Learn from, or Lose. And it's for the managers of complaint handlers. And I'm really engrossed in that subject. And I'm just staying focused in that area. I let go of everything else that I ever used to talk about. So that's what I'm doing. And let's see, what else can I say? Yes, Albuquerque is north of Mexico, in New Mexico. So it's easy to find us here, which is, we almost got a football stadium here. The state has some money because it has some oil in the southern part of the state, and the people voted it down. Amazing, huh?
Wow. But you were born in South Dakota. You've lived in San Francisco. Is it true Americans move all the time? You move around the whole country?
We do move a bit, but ultimately, I mean, some of us do, but the large statistics are that people live within 25 miles of their birthplace. That's where they live their whole lives. Now, maybe they go away for a period of time to college or something like that, but they come back. There's no way I wanted to go back. I dislike the state of South Dakota. I really disliked it.
Well, I've got to ask you, why was that?
It's very provincial. It's very conservative, and everybody knows everybody else's business. And it's mostly small town, rural America in the middle part of the state, and that has a big, long history of prejudice. And I wanted to get away from there when I was 6. I made that decision at 6, and I had been born in the wrong state. And then it was, but you can't leave when you're 6 or you're a runaway. So
Sure.
Yeah.
So how did you end up in San Francisco?
Well, I did my undergraduate work, and then I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and I met a professor there who was teaching on an extended leave at the University of Pittsburgh. And I got to know him, and he wrote a letter for me to get in, because that is not an easy. I was at the University of California, Berkeley, and that's not an easy school to get into. There were 1,000 people who applied for 25 positions, and I got one of them. And I think they looked at me and said, South Dakota, Illinois, Pennsylvania, let's give her a try and see what happens. I really think that's what went on. When I went into the first class, I sat down, and I was sitting next to all Ivy League graduates, people who had taken the Foreign Service exam or had already worked in the Foreign Service. They knew political leaders around the world. And I was 21 years old at that point. And boy, I realized that I was in a different universe than I had been used to. So
Sure.
Yeah.
And you've got a huge amount of qualifications. When did you stop being an academic and start being a businesswoman and a teacher and a professional speaker.
It took only one job working with teachers on a national defense program. And I mean, these people were very, very nice, but they just didn't have a very global or even national perspective. And I wanted that. So I decided I was going to quit. And then I decided I didn't want to ever have a boss again. And some of you may know that feeling. And so I became an entrepreneur, and that's how I lived my life since my early 20s.
I think you'll find almost everybody on this program live has had bosses, doesn't want another boss unless they're going to pay them so well. It's something that you can't.
Well, even good bosses aren't bad. I mean, some of them are really very, very good, and sometimes you can get paid a lot of money that way. But you're not in charge of what you study, what you think, what you do. You're doing somebody else's work, and I didn't want to do that. It only took one job, 1 year for me to figure that out. So.
And so I've got to ask you. So but then you left San Francisco, and now you're in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Well, I spent 3 years in Asia, which really rounded out my understanding of the globe. And I lived in Taiwan for 3 years, and then I came back, spent more time in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then I moved to Las Vegas and lived there for 18 years, and then Albuquerque. Each time it's been real estate costs. So things became much more expensive in each location, and I owned property, so I sold it and then could move to the next location and buy a lot more property. And then, I mean, Las Vegas is really, when I moved there were maybe 1 million people there, and now there's 3 million, and that's not that many years ago. And it's an extraordinary place. If people are just moving there right and left still. And it was so hot, and I could see, you listen to the news, and the climate news especially, it's going to have a problem, and they're running out of water. So we looked around for I like the desert, so we looked for something in this area, but that in a big city, so it had an airport, but that included Los Angeles, no thank you. Phoenix, no thank you. Colorado, no thank you. There just wasn't a lot there. So Albuquerque began to go up the list, and my husband and I drove over there, looked at the real estate. Their real estate has been remarkably stable for since the turn of the century. They didn't get hit with the 2008 money, the big problem with money, real estate in the late 2008. Wow. And so we were able to buy a lot of really good property here.
Okay, so before we turn to your book, I've got to ask you what you were doing in Taiwan, because that's very different to the USA.
It is. Well, my first husband and I had gotten Fulbrights to go to study in Vietnam, and then the Tet Offensive occurred, and the government canceled that program. So they said, go back home, go back to Berkeley. And we said, no, thank you. We're not going to do that. My gosh, we had sublet our apartment. We had taken leaves of absence from the university. So we said, we're going to get on a ship. And when we get there, we won't have any money. So we'll show up at the embassy and see what you do. And I knew George McGovern, and McGovern pleaded on me, pleaded on everybody in that program on our behalf. And they let us go to other places in Asia that would meet our needs. So that's how I ended up there. And I loved the place. It was incredibly backwards compared to where it is today. Talk about a country that has made progress. It's Taiwan. It's just unbelievable the kind of progress that country has made. And so it was fun to be able to live in a place like that where nobody had cars, no refrigeration, no telephones. And yet it's a big urban city in big apartment buildings. And you just learn how to live in a different way. And I loved it for some reason. I loved it. So
Well, it's very Western, isn't it? But of course, they're concerned with the Chinese who think it's part of China, and they want it back at some stage, don't they? And that could be a
they do. Yeah,
huge issue in the in the South China Sea. But
it could
we don't
be. It
talk
could be.
politics if we can help it.
And if they had made a decision, if the government of Taiwan had made a decision while they still were the Republic of China and said, we are now Taiwan. If they had done that, they would not be having the problems they're having today. But they didn't.
Wow.
They thought they could go back in and take over China. They really believed that.
Now you've been focusing on complaints. I know you've spoken all around the world, you've written a number of books, but why in 1988 did you start focusing on complaints? That's the first question. And
Yeah.
why 25
Yeah.
years later, actually 35 years later, probably doing my maths, you are refocusing on it. Has anything changed about complaining around the world?
No, the interesting thing is it hasn't changed much. All of the research that they do, and they keep replicating it and over, it's showing the same results. And that is most people do not complain, and most people do not handle complaints well. And most people, or well over 50% of people, walk away angry, disappointed, resolving never to do business with that. And that has not changed. I mean, how can that be? A field like this, where I think I mentioned to you, Derek, that the money that is left is calculated in the United States that it costs this economy over $1 trillion a year. And I've got the figure right here for England. It is $174 billion per year. And that's a higher percentage of your GDP than the $1 trillion is of the United States GDP.
So what is that figure, Janelle? Is that the figure that companies lose because they don't know people are unhappy with their products?
Exactly. Well, it's lost to the economy because then that money doesn't get counted then in that business. So, I mean, eventually these people will go to another business. We do. We find ways to get our needs met in the commercial enterprise. But yes, it's and then you've got the expense of reimbursement, and you've got the expense of people in call centers and people managing those people. I mean, the costs are high, and most businesses don't even know how many customers they're losing. They don't. I mean, it's a remarkably untouched field. Unlike, most businesses know what's happening in their business. They know, and they work to eliminate costs, and they work to increase profits, and that's not happening in the field of complaint handling. And I think it's a deep psychological reason. Most of us are pretty thin-skinned. We don't like people telling us what's wrong with us. And even if it's not us, it's our business, and we don't like it. And talk with somebody, give them a complaint, and you can hear their voice changes. You can hear their demeanor changes. It's one of those people complaining to me.
Or is that a cultural thing? I think some of us in Britain would think that Americans or people from the United States are a bit more thick-skinned than us, more likely to complain. Is that true?
The figures around the globe are a little bit different, but they're all pretty low. In the United States, the figures are like maybe 4% of people will complain. And statistically,
4%. 4%. Did you say that?
We'll complain to somebody who can do something about it.
Oh, okay.
Now they'll complain to each other. I mean, we might sitting here talking with each other on Zoom, find something to talk about. And then I went on this Uber and that happened. And then I flew on British Airways and then that happened. And then whatever, we talk to each other a lot about our discomfort, our dissatisfaction, but we don't we're not real good at confronting. This may be changing in the United States. I don't know, because you said not to discuss politics, and I'll just say this: in our political system now, there's an awful lot of violent verbal complaining that is going on. That is happening.
No, I did say I'd try and keep politics out of it, but I'm going to ask you a question at the end about US politics, if that's okay. Now, with negotiation, which is my specialism, also people don't like negotiating. They don't like negotiating because it causes confrontation. They might be turned down. it seems to be there's a similarity between perhaps negotiating and complaining. In fact, you are when you're complaining, you are actually negotiating, probably.
That's right. Yeah, you are.
So is that still that sort of human? From what you're telling me, it's a human nature issue across the globe. There may be different cultural issues, but it is a human nature thing.
Negotiation is pretty similar around the world too, I think. I mean, within a range, it's pretty similar. And I think with complaint handling, it is as well. I mean, there are some differences country by country, and the research would indicate that. But Americans are given all sorts of clues when we're young. You know, if you can't say something nice, don't say something at all. There's a whole bunch of these kinds of statements, and the British have that notion. You were telling me you don't use it so much, but get a stiff upper lip. You know, don't just put up with it. And almost every culture has these kinds of statements, and they were told to us in no uncertain terms when we were small children. And people get embarrassed. You know, if you're with your spouse and your spouse starts really ranting about service or something, you know, you come on, honey, shut up. Don't talk like that. It's a real psychological thing. But the point is this, and that is that businesses have to accept that that's who we are as humans. And now, what are we going to do? Because the ultimate prize is if you handle the complaint well, you get to keep the business. And people will go out and say nice things about you, more so than if there had been no problem to begin with. So there's real financial and economic benefits to this, to learning how to handle these things well. But if you look at like the CEOs in companies and the C-suite, there's nobody up there on complaint handling. Nobody. I don't think there's a single industry that has them up there. And they'll have customer service, and that's related, like negotiations, but it's different. Customer service is different. I think customer service works with the notion that you can make your exchanges with customers so perfect that they will never complain. I think that's their goal. They tell me this all the time. They say, well, it's nice to know how to handle complaints, but we just want to deliver our product in such a way so that nobody will ever complain. And I say to them, good luck. Good luck with that.
I think in the UK, they're just trying to give you some money. So you complain and they've made a mistake and they say, well, how much do you want? And then there's sort of a negotiation going on, which seems a very odd way to do it. Usually people want the issue sorted.
And a lot of people don't complain to get compensated. What they do is they complain so that they like the company. They just want them to do better about certain things. And so they complain about that. It's like we hide this in our society. We hide the complaints. We don't recognize that when things are complaints. My book, Complaint is a Gift, I did a whole bunch of book signings in bookstores. I can't tell you how many times I've sat and listened to somebody announce that I was in the building and I was signing books, and they would say, and Janelle Barlow, the author of A Compliment is a Gift. That's what they would say. A compliment. They couldn't even bring themselves to say a complaint is I heard that so many times. So we hide from that. People hide, many complaints come in the form of questions. Now, I don't know how that relates to the negotiation, but I would suspect it's in there as well. For example, somebody may say to a store, why aren't you open after 6 o'clock at night?
Yep.
That is a complaint. That is not a question. What that person is saying is, I want you to be open after 6 o'clock at night. That's what that statement is saying. And so many complaints come in the form of questions, and they don't get counted. So the number of complaints that people have. I did some work in Slovenia at one point, and I was talking with the hotel owner. I said, so do you get any complaints? Do people in Slovenia complain? And she said, oh, yes. We have a complaint book. Now, this was something that the Soviet Union had established when they had control of the Eastern Bloc. And I said, I'd love to see that book. And so she got a book that was dusty and brought it out. The last complaint that had been in there was something like 15 years from the day I looked at it. Oh yes, we get complaints. I said, well, that's interesting because I've been swimming in your swimming pool and I have some complaints about that. And at that point, the whole atmosphere changed. She didn't want to.
She could still find the complaint book 15 years after they've
Yeah.
actually
Under the front desk. That's where everybody kept it in most businesses, under wherever the front desk was in that business. And then you had to ask for the complaint book so that, you know, it made you the bad person.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So tell us, my perception would be in the Far East, they're softer, nicer people than perhaps in the West. And my experience in Europe, the Germans and the Dutch are more likely to complain than the
Yes, they are.
And people like that. I don't know if that's your experience.
Yeah, the Dutch are very direct. And when they say something, they will say something, but they aren't necessarily nasty about it. They just say what they're thinking. I've noticed that. Yeah, having done a bit of work there.
Yeah. And what about in the Far East? What about in Japan and
the Japanese hide they hide complaints all over the place. They don't like to admit that things are going bad. I mean, my gosh, look at them during the Second World War. They just refused to acknowledge that they were close to losing that war. They just wouldn't handle it. You can see that in Japanese business. In Asian business, there probably are not as many complaints, but when people do complain, they kind of go crazy. They go from, I'm not going to say anything, to, I'm going to kill you. You know, there's not much in between on, that was an exaggeration about killing, but there's extremes in which they operate. And it truly is cultural, and what we learn as children and what we can get away with. So do men or do women complain more?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Come on then.
Yeah,
I think men complain more than women, but I'm not sure that's right. Is that right?
They do. But the reputation is that women are whiners, that women are complainers. That's the reputation. But they do. And when they're discounted, men complain more. And I suspect that comes from a position of feeling, the ownership in society, their positioning in society. I would imagine in negotiations that there's a certain amount of strength that comes from just who you are and what position in society you come from.
Yeah, I mean, I think men negotiate more as well. I wonder if it's because of the hormones, because of testosterone. I don't know. That's maybe. But I have to be careful when I'm speaking to a mixed audience, making statements like that.
We'll accept anything here. I think that when women start to complain, they're called bitches, and if you'll excuse that word, they're called, they're called some pretty nasty names. But if somebody doesn't complain, then they're nice. I mean, how many men want to be described as nice? I don't think too many. It's not really considered a male attribute. But women, it's okay to call a woman nice. Oh, you're so nice. Yeah, I feel like killing you, but I'm not going to say anything. I mean, just look at, if you don't believe, just look at the next time you go someplace and you don't like what's going on. Do you speak out?
I think that's really interesting. It's more a question of how you speak out, isn't it? How you do it in a nice way, in rapport, rather than losing your cool, because we see people losing their cool all over the place.
I have found that the best way to complain, if you want to know how to get heard and not cause a lot of ruffles, you have to start off with something. I love doing business with your company. I've been with you for 10 years, and I really appreciate what you do, and your people are nice and wonderful. I just want to say, I think there's one thing you could be doing better. Or I just want to say that sometimes things aren't handled the way that I know that you want to, or I know that it doesn't match your quality level. So you have to start off with, I know you guys are doing a good job. And I honestly think that that's probably true for most companies. They don't start off thinking, how can we do this poorly?
Mm. No,
You think
no,
about
you're
how
absolutely right.
how can we meet a need and do it well? And
Yeah.
so if you start from that standpoint, then that's how I start my complaints. I always start that way, unless I'm experimenting. So
Well, you've written the book, so you should know. Now, you did give me permission to ask about American politics because most 98% of people on this call are sitting here in the UK, and politics is an issue all over the world. But we do wonder what's going on in the United States at the moment. What are you prepared to share with us?
I don't know, I don't know that we know what's going on, but we're definitely divided. Boy, are we a divided country at this point. I mean, uh, people won't marry each other of the different political parties. You have to make agreements when you're in groups to not talk about the issues. I know in our National Speakers Association Albuquerque chapter, we have an agreement that we won't discuss politics because most of us are pretty liberal Democrats, but we do have some Trump supporters, and we just agree that we will not bring up the issue because it never goes anyplace well, never. And I would like to really have more conversations with Trump supporters. I'd like to understand their positioning, how I don't understand it, and I don't think they understand my position either. So, I mean, you must have had that in the UK with when you left Brexit.
Oh
That
yeah, I mean the
sides were so different.
we always used to say never discuss politics, religion, and I added Brexit into that because it was causing the exactly the same issues because there was some sort of manipulation going on underneath it. Persuasive people, persuasive things on the internet because the betting was that we wouldn't leave up to
Right.
the day before. So something strange
But the
happened.
part of the problem is the silos that get created. And I mean, I listen to liberal TV news announcers pretty much all day long. I'm in that silo. And and I know some people who do nothing but watch Fox News, and they are in that silo. We are really both hearing different aspects of the same story, or we're even hearing different facts.
So Fox, just for us in the UK, Fox News is Republican, is it generally, or is it?
Fox News. Oh yes, Fox
Yeah,
News is.
sorry, we don't know this, but
You don't. Okay.
yeah.
Well, yes, it's Fox News.
But at
Yeah.
least you know what you're getting at that point, I suppose. Over here,
Yeah.
you don't really know what you're getting, but I guess.
But
Um,
you can go to BBC, and I think you're going to get a pretty straight coverage of the news. Isn't that right? I watch
well,
BBC.
I'm not sure about that. It's very
Maybe I'm
negative. In my mind, then BBC is very negative and sensational now, but other people tell me it's not. So there we are.
right.
Janelle, we're almost out of time. One last tip for people watching this on YouTube, listening to this on the podcast channel, etc., and people with us live, please, from you.
And one last thought, or one last.
One last tip, thought, something to leave us all with about.
I'm writing this book on 12 best business practices, and I have produced an overview, and I sent you a copy of that. And if anybody wants to ask me for it, I'm going to give away the overview for free, and then it describes. At some point in there, it describes the 12 best practices, and those I will be selling as online programs, and people don't have to buy all 12 of the best practices because some people really do know some of these practices. They're pretty common, but they are available. So if anybody wants to write me, should I give my email address? Oh, there it is.
Is that the book that you sent me? Is that
This is the overview.
okay?
This is just the overview, and it's a pretty lengthy overview, but it sets the whole subject up. And I'm pretty proud of it, of what I'm only going to do anything in PDF format. That's
Right.
the only thing. So if you want this, I'm happy to send it along to you. complete with endnotes, and you can take a look at it. And if it's interesting to you, then you can contact me when the 12 best practices are done, which they're not yet. I mean, they're pretty much done, but I am working like crazy, tweaking them, refining them, trying to find out potential complete sources so I can have a perfect book. Ha.
You're like a lot of us, aren't you? You never stop learning, you never stop sharing, and you never stop educating
I
yourself.
never stop hoping that we can do it right.
Yes, no, absolutely. So just to get this right, so people can contact you at janellebarlow.com for a copy of it, but I've got a copy of it as well. So I could put it in my
Yes.
newsletter next week, or I could send it to people who request it from me. So
right.
I'm derekarden.co.uk.
And you were able to open it just fine. So it's,
Yeah,
pass
absolutely.
it along and you should be able to open it fine. It is in the US format size and not the A4 size. That's the size?
I think as a PDF on a computer, I don't think it causes a problem at all. It might cause a problem if people want to print it out.
Well, if you tried to print it out, it would be a problem.
Brilliant. Janelle Barlow, thanks for joining us today, all the way from Albuquerque, which I think is 5,342 miles away, and a 7-hour time zone. It's still the morning when we're going for a cup of tea in a minute, but I really appreciate that. Will you stay on for a bit and answer some questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give you a vote of thanks in the normal way? Brilliant. Janelle Barlow, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch up again shortly.
Shortly.
Right, the recording stop. We've got a